Go!
Stories dominate our lives. They entertain us, they give us information, and they are what we are made of because our lives are stories. Although living a story may be simple and difficult at times, writing a story is always difficult. To aid writers in the process of creating a compelling story, Aristotle wrote a short work called the Poetics to assist writers in forming driving stories. He addresses two types of stories, the tragedy and the epic poem. He geared his work mostly towards what he believed to be the highest form of poetry, the tragedy. But his work also influenced the other category, epic poetry, and is also apparent in various poems throughout history. The influence of Aristotle's work is evident in Sophocles' tragedy Oedipus the King, also known as Oedipus Rex, as well as Homer's famous poem, the Odyssey. Since he drew on works before him and influenced writers after him, his rules are evident to a certain extent in practically every story ever written. Aristotle's guidelines to tragedy have transcended through history into many stories. Aristotle lists a plethora of rules to make up his structure of story in his work, The Poetics. However, a few main rules stand out that work well in many stories other than tragedy. Although Aristotle wrote mainly about tragedy and believed it to be the highest form of poetry, he also allows for the epic poem to surface in his writing. Aristotle addresses those principles by stating the 6 parts of tragedy in order of importance: the plot, the character, the diction, the thought, the spectacle, and the melody are all parts of the story that congeals together to shape the perfect plot. Although Aristotle lists all 6 as important parts of poetry, plot and character are the 2 most important aspects which I will turn my focus towards. Aristotle elucidates the point of developing a plot, which he calls the combination of the incidents of story, by adding on several rules and explanations of the rules to give readers a more detailed idea of the ideal plot. Since he considered Oedipus the King to be the perfect tragedy, he based some of his rules off of Sophocles' play. In order to have a perfect plot, Aristotle says that the plot can only have a single issue, like in Oedipus Rex, which is structured around Oedipus' search for identity. He then goes on to explain the most popular form of writing is one containing 3 parts. He describes a whole, complete story as one that has a beginning, middle, and an end. A beginning is that which is not itself necessarily after anything else, and which naturally has something else after it. He does not mean, however, that a story needs to start at the beginning of a character's life. Since a plot can only have a single issue, and a character's life would encompass many issues, Aristotle says that beginning a story at the beginning of a character's life is unacceptable. An end is that which is naturally after something else, with nothing else after it. Again, he is not saying that the ending is when the character's life ends, but only when the singular issue has been resolved. The middle, he says, is that which by nature is after one thing and has another after it. Therefore, a good plot must include all 3 aspects and cannot begin or end whenever the author wishes it for it to begin or end. Having a beginning, middle, and end are not the only 3 aspects an author must take into account when refining the plot. A couple chapters later, Aristotle addresses the unity of a plot by pointing out that the character is only a means to play out the story, and not the center of the story. The main character driving the story is known as the tragic hero. And the change in the hero's fortunes must not be from misery to happiness, but from happiness to misery, and the cause of it must lie in some great error on his part. Then he said that the actions in the play should happen propter hoc because of this, and not post hoc, after this. He goes on to say that the 3 parts of a good plot should include peripety, discovery, and suffering. Peripety is the change of a kind from one state of things within the play to its opposite. Peripety is evident when Oedipus goes from being the glorious redeemer of Thebes to the wretched creature who had committed the most abominable sin over the course of the play. This rapid change leads to discovery, which is a change from ignorance to knowledge, and thus either love or hate for the personages marked for good or evil fortune. Oedipus's total discovery occurs when he exclaims, "All come true! All burst to light." Although he slowly learns of his history, right after peripety occurs, his discovery is complete and an obvious change occurs in him, resulting consequently in suffering. Suffering is an action of a destructive or painful nature. The result of Oedipus's suffering comes about from his discovery, thus creating the tragedy. After realizing his abominable act, he must live with his sin and watch the pain of everyone suffering from it. This suffering is what causes Oedipus to tear the brooches off of Jocasta's robe and spear his eyes while crying, You'll see no more the pain I suffered, all the pain I caused." The states of peripety, discovery, and suffering all happen in a Proctor Hawk fashion, and throughout these stages, the story focuses on the one issue in Oedipus's life, drawing on past stories only to explain how it ties in with this moment. Another important aspect of story that Aristotle stated was the character. He laid out 4 points that he believed should be in every character. First, the character should be good, and this goodness can emanate out of any person regardless of age and class. Good, Aristotle says, is what a personage says or does that reveals a certain moral purpose. In Oedipus Rex, Oedipus tries to right a wrong by finding the man that murdered Laius, the former king of Thebes. The second point is the nature of the character should be appropriate for who he or she is playing in the story. In the same way, Oedipus's brilliance and search for truth caused his downfall. If he were not as intelligent, he may not have been in the unhappy state he occupied at the end of the play. The third point emphasizes the realness of the character and the ability for the audience to relate to him. Even though the trials that Oedipus experiences is generally not a common experience among most people, his moral purpose, to discover truth, is relatable and therefore creates his sense of realism. Finally, the fourth point states that the character should be consistent. Even if inconsistency be part of the man, he should still be consistently inconsistent. Throughout the entirety of the play, Oedipus is striving to learn the truth. He wanted first to discover the truth of who killed Laius, then his true identity. Since Aristotle based his theory so heavily on Oedipus Rex, identifying elements of the theory directly from the play is quite effortless. First and foremost, since the plot is most important aspect of the theory, it is simple to distinguish Aristotle's rules in the play. The story structure starts off with the beginning and the start of an issue which is presented through the crisis. A drought that plagues Thebes forces Oedipus to find a cure. As the priest bemoans to Oedipus, Thebes is dying. A blight on the fresh crop and rich pasture, cattle sicken and die. Oedipus informs them that he has already sent Creon to the oracle of Delphi. Creon, upon returning, tells everyone that Laius, Thebes' former king who was murdered, needed to be avenged. At this point, the core issue begins to slowly emerge. The story accelerates as Oedipus creates the catalyst for the story by bringing curses down upon the murderer and whoever sheltered him. "I order you," Oedipus proclaims in front of the city, "banish this man, whoever he may be. Never shelter him, never speak a word to him, drive him out. He is the plague of our corruption." He even declares the curse upon himself, believing that others had committed the murder. As the story progresses, Oedipus's quest for the murderer morphs into a quest to know himself. After Tiresias, the blind prophet, blames Odysseus for murdering Laius, he fumes and denies it. However, when his wife Jocasta attempts to calm his fears by telling him prophets and prophecies did not know the future, she provoked a thought in Oedipus. "I thought I heard you say that Laius was killed on a place where 3 roads met," he says to Jocasta. He suddenly remembers that he had killed a man at a place where 3 roads met. The issue then fully emerges as Oedipus' search for his identity. He then confides in Jocasta, telling her that he fled Corinth because he feared a prophecy that he would kill his father and marry his mother. His confusion increases when the Corinthian messenger arrives on the scene to lament Polybus, Oedipus' father's death. He also congratulates Oedipus on inheriting Corinth as well as having possession of Thebes. Oedipus rejoices in realizing that he has not killed Polybus, his father. However, while celebrating with Oedipus, the messenger unwittingly reveals part of Oedipus' history by stating that Oedipus was actually adopted. He then explains how he received Oedipus and gave him to the Corinthian king and queen. Oedipus and Jocasta both received 2 similar prophecies. but Jocasta dismissed hers, while Oedipus continued his search to learn his true origin. Oedipus's history eventually becomes hinged on the witness of the shepherd, a servant that had escaped when Laius was murdered. When the shepherd tells his testimony, Oedipus realizes that the prophecy has been fulfilled. "All come true, all burst to light," he cries. "I stand revealed at last, cursed in my birth, cursed in marriage, cursed in the lives I cut down with these hands." Oedipus leaves Thebes, under exile from his own declaration, resolving the issue and concluding the play. Oedipus Rex not only fits perfectly into Aristotle's structure because it has a beginning, middle, and ending, it also checks off many requirements Aristotle lists out. The singular issue is slowly revealed throughout the course of the play, and it contains peripety, discovery, and suffering. As Aristotle had stated, the role of the main character, known as the tragic hero, is brought to ruin by a great error on his part. The reason he finds this form to be the most effective for tragedy is because he believes he will move the audience to pity. Aristotle considered Oedipus the King to be the perfect tragedy, and the play lines up with his rules just as perfectly. Even though Aristotle thought that all self-respecting plotlines should be tragedies, many stories diverge. Homer's epic poem, the Odyssey, strays from the category of tragedy. Aristotle addresses epic poems, however. He says that similar to tragedy, epic poetry should be based on a single action, one that is complete, whole, in itself, with a beginning, middle, and end. He also points out that the plot should revolve around one issue. Although the plot of the Odyssey circles around Odysseus, it does zero in on one point in his life, namely his journey home. The beginning drops the audience right into his captivity with the nymph Calypso, which launches the narrative. Since a beginning is that which is not itself necessarily after anything else, and which has naturally something else after it, it seems contradictory to start in the middle of the action. However, since Aristotle says that the story should encompass one issue, when Athena commands Calypso to let Odysseus go, he begins his journey home, thus starting the issue. The story ends when the issue becomes resolved. Oedipus goes home to his wife and son, abolishes the dreams and lives of all the suitors, and wins his wife's affection again. However, the middle is filled with mini stories that seem to wander all over the map. Even though the stories seem to wander in all directions, only loosely tied together by Odysseus' presence, Aristotle says that this allows for the use of peripety, discovery, and suffering. The epic poem resembles tragedy in many aspects, most notably the unity of the plot and the three elements, peripety, discovery, and suffering. The story of the Cyclops is a fitting example that shows how each individual suffering follows a beginning, middle, and end, as well as peripety, discovery, and suffering. The story takes place in one point along the journey and contains a singular issue. Odysseus and his men need to escape the cannibalistic Cyclops, Polyphemus. The issue is resolved as Odysseus and his men successfully escape the island and move on to their next adventure. During the middle, though, both Odysseus and Polyphemus experience peripety, discovery, and suffering simultaneously. Odysseus and his men, after washing onto an island, bring some of their possessions from the ship into a cave they discover. Unbeknownst to them, the cave belongs to Polyphemus the Cyclops, who bars the entrance of the gate with a giant slab of rock. That 24 four-wheeled wagons with heaving wagon teams could not have stirred that tonnage of rock from where he wedged it over the door sill, Odysseus describes. When Odysseus tells Polyphemus, "We would entreat you, great sir, to have care for the gods' courtesy. Zeus will avenge the unoffending guest." Polyphemus decides at that moment to have a feast on some of his guests to prove to Odysseus that we, Cyclops, care not a whistle for your thundering Zeus. Since peripety is an abrupt change from one state to its opposite state, Odysseus and his men experience this state of peripety as they realize they have gone from a state of power to utter helplessness against this beast. All the men realize that killing the Cyclops would not be wise because no one could lift the stone slab over the entrance to the gate except for Polyphemus. This trial causes Odysseus to discover that he could only defeat Polyphemus by outsmarting him, not by killing him. Odysseus orders his men to make a gigantic spike and hides it in the corner. Then he tries to befriend the Cyclops by giving him some of the wine they had brought down from their ship. When the Cyclops has drunk and fallen asleep in a stupor, Odysseus takes the spike and with the help of his men, stabs it into the Cyclops' eyes. As Polyphemus wails in pain, he experiences simultaneous peripety, discovery, and suffering. At that moment, Polyphemus has been outwitted and goes from a state of complete control to utter helplessness. The realization is completely driven in as he calls out for his fellow Cyclops for help. "What ails you, Polyphemus? Why do you cry so sore in the starry night? Sure, no man's driving off your flock. No man has tricked you," the other Cyclops asked Polyphemus. Polyphemus roared in answer, Nobody's tricked me! Nobody's ruined me!" To this rough shout they made a sage reply, "Ah, well, if nobody has played you foul there in your lonely bed, we are of no use in pain given by great Zeus." He discovers that he is not as powerful as he once presumed, and is suffering from the effects of his discovery by not only being humbled by Odysseus' wile, but being blinded as well. Although it appears that Odysseus' trials are over because he has subjected Polyphemus to suffering and acknowledged that he is less powerful than he originally thought, Polyphemus sits at the entrance of the cave, blocking all possibility of the men dashing out of the cave. Odysseus contrived to put his men under the Cyclops' sheep, and as the sheep went out of the cave, the Cyclops, who brushed the tops of his sheep in order to count them, completely missed the men strapped beneath the sheep. As soon as Odysseus reached his ship, he begins threatening Polyphemus, shouting, "Oh, Cyclops, would you feast on my companions? Puny am I in a caveman's hands." Polyphemus, who again realizes that he has been outwitted, seethes with hate, since he is the personage marked for evil fortune. On the other end of the spectrum, Odysseus threatens Polyphemus by saying, "Cyclops, if ever mortal man inquire how you were put to shame and blinded, tell him, Odysseus, raider of cities, took your eye. Laertes' son, whose home's on Ithaca." Although peripety does not occur from Odysseus' taunts, Polyphemus prays to Poseidon, who, being the god of the sea, made the trip home for Odysseus full of troubles. Therefore, because of his actions, he falls from a state of power to helplessness, even though he doesn't realize it at the moment. The singular issue of the Odyssey emerges as his journey home on a small ship tossed around mercilessly by the sea god. Throughout the rest of the story, Odysseus' struggle to resolve the issue takes forms in many other adventures which he is constantly receiving, discovery, and suffering from his taunts towards the Cyclops. Odysseus' character also lines up with the 4 points that Aristotle lays out for tragedy. Although the book presents his character as crafty in nature, he is good because his moral purpose throughout the entire poem is to return home to his family. His character is also appropriate because Aristotle says it is not appropriate in a female character to be manly or clever. However, since Odysseus is a man, his manliness and cleverness suit his character. Like Oedipus, Odysseus' specific experience is not the most relatable, but his moral purpose is the gateway to empathy. He faces various tribulations in order to reach his homeland after the war, and likewise people returning from wars may be able to relate to the essence of his struggles. And finally, Odysseus is consistently deceitful. Homer constantly refers to him as the great tactician, and to his tactful replies. Even Odysseus himself informs his host, "I am Laertes' son Odysseus. Men hold me formidable for guile, in peace and war." His cunning saved him from many troubles, most notably during his encounter with the Cyclops. Odysseus' character, although not the center of the story, is a large driving force in the story. All good stories have been influenced by Aristotle's rules, directly and indirectly. All stories can be boiled down to encompass a singular issue and contain a beginning, middle, and end. Although they may not all contain peripety, discovery, and suffering, characters will generally also follow the 4 points. The protagonist generally has a moral purpose for his actions, and the nature of the character is appropriate for the role. The characters are relatable so the audience is able to sympathize with his or her struggles to some extent. Oftentimes, the relatability of the character is very minuscule and the struggle arcs struggles are extreme, but the slightest gateway to empathy is enough for the audience to connect with the character. Finally, consistent characters give the audience a good grasp of why the characters make the choices they do, which adds to the overall unity of the story. The unity of the story is paramount, so all the rules naturally aid the writer in crafting a coherent, singular story. Oedipus the King, the Odyssey, and the Odyssey are both stories that follow Aristotle's rule of dramatic theory. They include all the incidents of story and a beginning, middle, and end. They also contain peripety, discovery, and suffering for all characters involved, and the characters contain the 4 points to create strong characters. Since Aristotle's guidelines to story have transcended through history into many works, its mark can be seen in almost every type of plot, ranging from the tragedy to epic poetry and all other stories in between. We all long to hear a good story, and Aristotle helps the authors to develop this good story. Stories dominate our lives. They entertain us, they give us information, and they are what we are made of because our lives are stories. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ong. Would you please begin by explaining the story of Polyphemus' Den from the perspective or with regard to how it fits into Aristotle's guidelines regarding beginning, middle, and end? How do those three concepts apply to the Polyphemus cave story?
Like from Polyphemus' perspective, or just?
I'm not sure which perspective it would be. However, I would like to know how that story, which seems simply like one unity, would be properly understood as beginning, middle, and end.
Well, it first begins, like the whole issue is, the singular issue is them trying to escape. And so when they go in, it's like the beginning of the story. And so when they walk in, they don't really know that they're in trouble, but they're in trouble already, and that's kind of where it begins. Like in Oedipus, there's a beginning, there's like a problem, but they don't really know exactly what the problem is. And so, and when he escapes the cave, it's like when it ends, because the singular issue of him not being able to escape is resolved, because he did escape finally. And then the middle is just how he went from the beginning to the end through all his craftiness and realizing that he's not able to just kill the Polyphemus because he would just die in there also.
Mm-hmm. How specific can you be in that story as to where the division between beginning and middle actually occurs? Is that an arbitrary distinction, or just kind of a vague distinction, or can you actually, in some sense, give a point at which beginning is done and now we're into middle?
I think the beginning is done when Polyphemus eats the men. Then they realize, like, oh, we have to get out of here, and that's when you, from the beginning to the end, you have this middle section of them figuring out how to get out. So this whole middle section is just figuring out how to escape. And so they don't realize that they have to escape until the Cyclops eats some of them, and then they have to realize that they have to escape in order to survive. And that's where the whole issue starts to come out, and that's where the middle begins.
Mm-hmm. And can you do the same for the distinction between middle and end?
The ending is when they finally escape, and they're on the boat, so they've gotten out from underneath the sheep. They've left the cave, and so then their issue of not being able to escape is resolved because they're out of the cave now. And so as soon as they're out of the cave, it resolves the issue of them not being able to escape. And so that's when the middle ends and the end begins.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you very much. In your last paragraph, you eloquently refer to the idea of our own lives being stories. And yet, it seems that you really can't understand your life as a story until it's done. So is the concept of our own life being stories something which is just kind of an idea that's nice to say, or is there a real sense in which we can lay hold of this notion of our life being a story and have that be meaningful to us now?
Well, kind of like Odysseus going through the Odyssey, we have stories that are like mini stories, and so our entire life to Aristotle, wouldn't be like one big story. It would be a bunch of small stories all chopped up and then kind of mushed together.
Okay, so you would say it's more episodic stories throughout particular periods of our life.
Yeah.
Okay. Also, sometimes people say their lives don't feel like a story. Their life just feels like, unending buzz on the television screen, just one thing happening after another, and they don't have a sense of story in their life. What gives you just kind of your own sense of conviction, or at least your own sense of your life being a story rather than just disconnected events?
Do you mean like, I'm sorry, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that.
Yeah, well, you make the assertion at the end of this paper that stories dominate our lives. And so I guess I'm asking for you to make an account of why you feel that way. Why do you feel that story is something that you see in your own life? That it seems some people don't feel that. Some people feel that their life is kind of pointless. There's just kind of one thing after another. There really is no meaningful story arc to their lives. And so why do you feel that your life is a story, and why do you feel story is part of what you experience?
Well, I don't think even though they don't feel that they're not in a story, they're technically are in a story at the same time, because throughout your life you still have these issues you have to deal with. Like when you are 2, you need to learn how to like go to the bathroom. And so that would be one issue of you learning how to do that. It may not be a very significant one, but it's something generally everyone has to learn. So even though you come up with stories, you don't necessarily say like, oh, my life is this story, but your life is composed of all these stories and you're just living it. But when you look back on it, you can say like, oh, look at this episode of my life. And then you would, in order to talk about it, you have to say it in a story structure. And so even though some people may not think that their life is a story, it actually still is.
Okay, thank you very much. Other questions?
Okay.
So I've done a lot of fiction writing, dabbled in it, and I've heard it said in the writing world a lot that rules were meant to be broken. So I guess my question would be, in what sense does that play into this? What would you say to that?
Well, I personally think it's kind of hard to break the beginning, middle, and end rule. I mean, how would you do that? But yeah, definitely there's some parts of it that can be broken down, but a majority of the time, even though they say like, oh, we're gonna break this rule, that doesn't necessarily, you may just be doing the rule in a different way. Like if you were to say a more specific rule, like the good guy always has to win, would be a rule that I probably would break at some point in my writing too. But rules that are this broad and just generally so ingrained into stories, it's kind of hard to break those, I think. So it would be interesting for you to break one of those. But
Other questions?
yes?
At the beginning of your paper, you say, are you talking about Aristotle forming his style of tragedy and poetics? And you say, since he considered Oedipus the king to be the perfect tragedy, he based some of his rules off of Sophocles' play. So, are you saying here that his ideal tragedy is what Sophocles' play was, or that Sophocles' play fit his idea of a good tragedy? Is it kind of, or vice versa, kind of a chicken before the egg or the egg before the chicken kind of a thing?
Well, no, he based his rules off of Sophocles' play, because he does reference it a lot. He's always like, oh, this play is really perfect and this is why. And so he says we should learn from this play, and he says like, this is what makes this play good, and that's where his rules come from. He says this thing about the play is good because of this, therefore all other tragedy writers should do this.
do you think makes us like stories so much? Do you think it's because we can relate to characters a lot, or are they just entertaining, or what do you think makes us get so involved in stories and enjoy it?
That is a really good question. I think it's because of the relatability. Like, if you have a story, if you're watching a movie and you see like the character's not relatable, you generally don't enjoy the story. And so not all stories are enjoyable, but generally the ones where you have a good driving story and you have good characters, those ones would constitute a good story. And so I wouldn't say like we always enjoy all stories, but we always enjoy good stories, and it's because of some of these rules that he talks about that creates a good story, and that's why we enjoy them. But yeah, I think relatability has like a big thing to do with it. Yes.
Great paper.
Thank you.
I like the whole entire, our lives being a story. So looking back at our lives later and seeing that it actually is a story, and there's a bunch of small stories, but do you think that everyone has like a main like beginning, middle, and end in their life that was like their like defining moment?
Yes. I would say it's a little bit like not Oedipus, the Odyssey, and I can't remember which. I think it was Sophocles that said that you can't really say your life is happy until you're dead. So it's hard to see the arc when you're still living it, because like you may think, oh, this is the high point of my life, and it's really like right here and you're still here. And so it's hard to say like, oh, this life is like one big story and with little stories inside, because it's hard to see it when you're still alive. Like if we look back on other people who've already been underground for a while, then we can say like, oh, look at this story of their life, like bibliographies and all that. Sometimes they're like, because they're not structured around this because it's a person. But generally you would still see a bit of that story arc. Yes.
So you said earlier that we always enjoy a good story.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree with you in that Oedipus Rex and Aristotle, and that Oedipus Rex is a good story, but I wouldn't necessarily say I particularly enjoyed it. The plot line is just a little bit gruesome for my taste. So what is it that makes a story intrinsically good, according to Aristotle or according to Debra Ong? What is it that makes us attracted to a story, or poignant, or what is it that makes it good?
I think the character, I think, has a very big is a very big part of it. And like he said, the story shouldn't structure around the character, but the character is a very big part of the story. They kind of go hand in hand. That's why they're like the two biggest parts of it. And so what makes a story intrinsically good? I'm not sure. Well, I say like the story is good. It doesn't necessarily mean you enjoy it. Like, I'm not a big fan of it either, because it is kind of gross. But the structure, I think, the structure and the rules that once you put it together, you could use all those rules and you can manipulate the story in different ways. But if you have that basic good story kind of a line, then people are able to relate to it. Like Shakespeare stuff is in so many things. It's because it's like a good story, first of all, and then you've got these characters that people can relate to just a little bit at least. And so it's been adapted to so many different things because of the story. And well, you might not necessarily like the story, but you like the different aspect or the spin-off of that story. So the story itself, like the way it's written, may not necessarily be your favorite, but the bottom intrinsic goodness of the story, I guess, is what makes it good or bad. Oh my goodness. Olivia.
Okay, I have 2 questions, but I'll start with the first one. You brought up Shakespeare, and in the play, I forget the name of it, we read it in GBT, but the character Jacques, whenever that play was.
As You Like It.
As You Like It, that's what I thought. He talks about the world being a stage and men playing roles, and he gives seven different stages of the theater of life. And how much do you think that sort of represents different highs and lows, as you're talking about the beginning, the middle, and the end of a story? So Aristotle and Shakespeare's or Jacques' idea of life and the story of life are different. So how our lives, in your view, what is it more like, Shakespeare's idea or Aristotle, that we have just a beginning, a middle, and an end, or different stages?
I don't think they I think Shakespeare's idea is much more broad for like the entire life, and Aristotle's is much more to one point. And so like your life isn't one point, like you don't stay at potty training stage forever, because that would be really depressing. But so Shakespeare's ideas is like covering a scope of like, this is your entire life, and you've got your upside downs and all that. But in a story, if you're gonna say like a play kind of a story, you're not gonna say, and this is the entire life of Odysseus and he slept for how many hours, because that would be super boring. And I think having Aristotle's rules is like trying to teach you how do you take one point in a story, in a character's life, and then talk about this one point, and then you can draw from other parts of his life to talk about this one point, but all the things you draw from his life from other times have to add to the story. So it's different, it's not the same thing, you know what I mean. Emma?
Great job on your paper, by the way.
Thank you.
So we have Aristotle's guidelines for what a good story is, but and that's, influenced our stories throughout history. But I would argue that I think stories even before Aristotle had a good sense of, a beginning, middle, and end, and peripety, discovery, and suffering are important elements of a story. So why do you think that we here on Earth just have a common sense of what goes into a good story?
Well, with the beginning, middle, and end, I feel like that's pretty obvious, because it's hard to say. We got put into time. That's why God is outside of time, and we're like, what is this? With character, I think that's a little harder. I think generally, because we enjoy having the good guys win, like that's just a sense of justice that we have, and so having that in a character is it's like kind of human, I guess. It makes the character human to have these elements of the person, just being able to relate to him in many ways. I don't know if that answers your question.
Great.
Okay. Did you have a question?
She asked exactly what I was going to ask. Yeah.
Deborah, looking at Aristotle's guidelines as guidelines for fine story writing, I once heard a professor say, looking at Aristotle's guidelines on writing tragedy and seeing him examine Sophocles and Aeschylus, it's a little bit like getting a physicist to look at Shakespeare's writing and explain to you the greatness of Shakespeare 200 years after Shakespeare died. And that, Aristotle is this kind of very abstract fellow and never wrote a story in his life. And his guidelines are kind of the touch of death on real story writing. And do you think there's ever a truly inspired author? I mean, it's the sort of people who can write really compelling stories. who've sat down and looked at Aristotle's guidelines or any set of rules or guidelines and written their story in response to them? I mean, taking Homer. I mean, do you think Homer ever thought about any rules when he was sitting down to compose his tales?
I don't think he necessarily thought of the rules, but he just, like Emma was saying, you just kind of know about them because of like the way human nature is and our sense of justice and our sense of time. It just follows that kind of a structure. I know Ted Dekker wrote this story where he goes in circles. I'm not exactly sure how that works, but still, he's going in circles, but he still has that sense of he's going through time. And so you can't exactly, these rules I think are very hard to break. It's just reinforcing, it's not saying this is what you have to do necessarily, it's just saying like this is what a good story has, and it's kind of a given that you have a beginning, middle, and end. So I don't think it kills stories necessarily. It just, for someone who's not able to say, well, how come this story is better than this story? If you look at this and you're like, oh, that's why this story is better than this story. Something like that.
Do you think that stories that are gripping to us are the same thing as what Aristotle is going after? And the reason I think of this is just so, it seems so often what makes stories gripping to people is suspense. They're concerned about a character, here's, some, typical Indiana Jones movie where, oh, here's something that's going to get him up, he gets away, up, here's another thing that's going to get him up, he gets away. And so it seems suspense is, you're always worried. And I have to say, just the kind of the humorous aspect of it is my wife grew up with her father loving shoot-'em-up movies, and she quickly got so bored of them that shoot-'em-up movies actually physically make her tired, and she falls asleep. And I'm very sensitive to suspense, but many movies are just working on one suspense after another. I see that coming, I just turn off because it's just kind of like, oh, this is boring. Just one moment of suspense after the next. Now, who's going to get shot next? And what Aristotle's getting for are things like consistent characterization, a well-organized plot line, not just one, suspenseful moment after another. Are these things that are more an acquired taste, or are they really fundamental to us as human beings? I mean, it seems like there's an awful lot of our stories now that are really not following Aristotle's guidelines. It really just kind of works on drama and suspense, and there's really not an attempt to follow Aristotle's guidelines. So, I mean, is Aristotle's guidelines kind of like, guidelines for fine literature, or is it really more universal than that?
I think it's more universal. For example, like Indiana Jones, it would definitely have a lot of the peripety, discovery, and suffering. Like, oh, this guy that I thought was good turned out to be bad, and now I don't have my whip, and he has the little gold statue, and he's running off with it. So, and then he's got suffering because of that. Like, he's stuck on this side, and then the rock is gonna smush him. I haven't seen that in a long time, but like something's gonna happen, or he's about to die, and so really it's everything together. Like, if you empathize with the character, you're gonna be concerned for him, and that's where the suspense comes from. Like, if you don't care about the character, then you're not gonna really care if he dies or not. You might be happy that he dies, so that
root for the rolling ball.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Other questions?
Yes.
So you talked a lot about how in a good story it's important that the character is relatable, and reading or watching the story you can relate to it. So what is your opinion on when people read or watch stories that are like really sad, or like, for instance, horror movies? People don't want to be scared, but when it comes to, like, some people think a horror movie is really fun and enjoyable. So is a good story not only relatable but also let us put ourselves in hypothetical situations? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, definitely. Because when you watch a horror movie, you're not like, oh my goodness, what if I get killed by Freddy Krueger? And he's just looking like, and then you'll have nightmares forever. But it's kind of basing off your fear of a nightmare, and so you're relating with the character in the sense that you also have nightmares, and you might also have nightmares like this. And the horror movie just takes it a step further and like, what if he like kills you in your sleep? So you're still relating to the characters even though they're in this hypothetical situation. And I think people watch horror movies because they're like, let's put myself in danger without actually being in danger, because it's like an adrenaline rush. So that's what I think about that. Yes.
So your paper's premise was that if you follow Aristotle's rules to writing a tragedy, you're going to end up with a good story. And then you also said that our lives were a story. So would you extend the metaphor by saying, if we follow a specific set of rules, we're going to live a good life? And if so, what are those rules?
No, I don't think so. It's because stories are our lives. It's not like one singular story. And so we have many stories through our lives. And so each individual story, it's kind of hard to be all like, I'm gonna follow this rule and I'm gonna suffer, like I'm gonna have suffering right now, because I personally wouldn't want that. But when you're living, you can notice those things and you're like, oh, this is what's happening, and maybe it's easier for you to understand what's going on. But really, I think if you want a good life, you just read the Bible. It's better. Yes?
I'm curious the history of story writing. With your beginning, center part, the end. You often see they think that there's this beginning is really the ending. And then the flashback to tell the story of what went on at the end. Is that a new technique? What have you seen in the period of history? Different ways of stories are told.
That's really good. Actually, the Odyssey is written like that, because you're technically towards the end of the story already. He gets off the island and then he goes to that guy's palace and he's starting to tell his story. So technically it's like a gigantic flashback story. I think with that way, when he gets, because what happens is he goes through it and then he gets stuck on the island. And so if you start at the beginning and you do it in chronological order, you'll get stuck on this island for a very long time. So when Homer starts the story, he's dropping the audience in the middle, but he's kind of starting the story at the same time, because he says, Athena tells Calypso, you need to let him go home. And that's when you realize he's stuck on this island and he wants to go home. And this is all the trouble he went through just to get home. And with the way he put the audience at the end first, or kind of in the middle first, he's able to skip through some spots in the middle where there's not much going on.
Other questions? Thank you very much. Well done. All right, we are going to have a little while before the festivities start, and so if I could get you guys to take the white chairs and just create a little ring around the fire pit, and we won't need all of these. Some of them, I think, why don't we just take the folding ones, or the armchairs, and stack them up. I think we just need the folding chairs around. So thank you all very much for your patience today. It's been a good journey together, and the story of your lives have been enriched. So we will, I will find out what time we're going to eat, and we'll get that started when it's ready. So. You look like you have a question, Hope.
Oh my goodness. Thank you.
Character you wish to die to.
Oh my goodness. I was like,
That was so, you did so good. That was great. I loved it. It was awesome.
Wow.
I tried helping and it doesn't work.
Something happened to my leg. I think I was running in that sunset. My tendon.
I was gonna help, but then I realized everyone else is kind of doing it, so I'll stand here and supervise. I know, I'll give you guys a hand.
Give me.
Yay!
Tell me what to do.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I got it here now.
Yes, now drop it.
Okay.
Now pick up the entire thing over your head and do like 50 squats.
Dressy tank top.
Over
I
your
was like,
head
that
though.
looks really cool.
Okay, bring like 50 squats like that. Okay. Or balance it all on your nose.
Especially you guys, because I don't get to meet you.
Oh no, you might have to cross the country. It was weird being in the classroom today thinking like, I'm not on the computer, I'm actually here. I heard you say Voldemort and I'm like, what? Yeah, it was because of you, I know it. I saw his face, so I decided not to watch the movie.
He's gonna break his back. Wes is gonna break his back over there.
Oh.
And if you have to make a circle,
One ring of chairs to rule them all.
Oh wait, no, you did break it. Gee, thanks Emma. You're welcome. Here, you should touch it last, that way you can blame it on you.
Emma, when Jared was talking about you can't realize a square circle, remember that?
Oh,
thing?
yeah.
I thought about Ethan Lou. I was
I
like,
know.
he needs to be here and show us that a square
the
circle
guy.
exists.
That's the guy I was talking to you about the 2 + 2 = 3 guy.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Wait, he tried to do that too?
Yeah.
I think that guy must
Yeah,
have
so like
left
in
the
class,
Other
he
things.
had this like drawing
2 +
program,
2
and he
=
tried
3
to
guy.
and he tried to prove that you can have like a square circle.
Yeah.
Who is this?
Right there, man. That is a squircle right there.
Oh wow,
Wait,
look,
can I
look,
see?
it's square but it has a circle. Okay.
It's a squircle.
Okay.
It's a proof. Squircle kind of squircles. That along with unicorn. Do not say not really. Not really.
Every time I think of square circle, I always think of unicorn though.
Yeah. It'll come up with a better analogy somewhere. I just like
No, that was
cliche
a
analogy,
classic.
just throw it out.
It
Just
works.
do what they do.
Jared, it's classic.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's bad. It's just I said that was no, it's
I'll hold your picture while you're.
oh, that's right, our picture. Oh, that's right.
It's gonna be her object.